Hearing will come to order. We have a full agenda this afternoon with 20 bills, including several addressing forest and wildfire management issues. These bills represent priorities of members of both sides of the aisle, including several members of the committee. A number of the bills on the agenda were considered by the committee last Congress. Although many of these issues are familiar, we wanted to allow committee members the opportunity to get updated information and ask any questions that they might have. After subcommittee members have an opportunity to make an opening statement, the subcommittee will then hear from representatives of the Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service, who will provide the administration's testimony on the bills, and Mark Boschel with the Utah Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office. At this time, I'd like to briefly comment on two of the bills that I have sponsored. Regarding S-1764, this is the Western Wildfire Support Act. This summer, I spoke to firefighters across Nevada who are combating increasingly frequent and dangerous wildfires. We need to be doing more to support these brave men and women and help keep our communities, businesses, and families safe. And we need to take a meaningful, holistic look at how we combat the growing and longer wildfire seasons. My bill will do just that. It will address efforts for wildfire prevention, suppression, and recovery. Specifically, my bill would direct the Interior Department and the Forest Service to create wildfire plans for federal lands to include pre-fire planning, wildfire response management, and post-fire recovery. It provides funding to help communities, homeowners, and businesses prepare for wildfires by increasing their defensible space and implement community cleanup efforts. It expedites the placement of wildfire detection equipment, including cameras and sensors, and creates a grant program to help local agencies acquire firefighting equipment, including slip-on tank units and air tankers. And it provides funding to help communities impacted by wildfires conduct long-term rehabilitation projects and creates a program to reduce the spread of invasive species. We've already delivered funding to help support wildfire risk reduction in the bipartisan infrastructure law. Passing my legislation is a critical next step to combat the threat of wildfires really across the country. Regarding S-3079, this is my Accelerating Appraisals and Conservation Efforts Act. This bill would alleviate the land appraisal bottleneck, which is slowing progress on key land transactions and impairing progress on long-standing projects and partnerships that inhibit states, municipalities, and communities nationwide from accomplishing their conservation, economic development, and housing goals. Specifically, this bill would enable DOI to contract with private appraisers who are credentialed in one state to perform appraisal and valuation services on DOI's behalf in any state. Just for example, with the Land and Water Conservation Fund now permanently and fully funded, and with communities across the country actively seeking to collaborate with DOI on land transactions vital to progress and preservation alike, the demands on the department grow greater day by day. This bill provides an additional tool that, when needed, can be utilized to decrease the backlog of those land projects that are under review. So at this time, I'd also like to recognize my friend and colleague, Senator Lee, for his opening statement.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair, for convening this hearing. And I also wish to express thanks for our witnesses who've joined us today. Among our witnesses today is Mr. Mark Boschel, who has traveled here all the way from Panguitch, Utah, a small town in southern Utah where my great-great-grandfather happens to be buried. Mark is the son of a forester and is himself a former BLM wildland firefighter. Mark currently serves as the Deputy Director of an important office in Utah called the Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office, known as PLPCO. In Utah, PLPCO spearheads a collaborative approach among local, state, and federal stakeholders for land and forest management. This office works diligently across the state, coordinating land management issues and genuinely addressing the needs of both the land itself and local communities affected by the land. I commend PLPCO for its great work and Mr. Boschel for his leadership, hard work, and his willingness to be here today. I'm pleased to have worked with stakeholders in Utah to introduce three bills that are on today's agenda. S-2151, the Utah Wildfire Research Institute Act, S-2132, the Catastrophic Wildfire Prevention Act, and S 3036, the Mountain View Corridor Completion Act. This past summer, the East Coast experienced what we in Western states deal with all the time. One could argue every year, and that is thick smoke from catastrophic wildfires that are clouding the horizon and, in the process, causing dangerous air quality. It was shocking to look out from the Capitol and not be able to see clearly down the National Mall, even to the Washington Monument. But Westerners live with this kind of haze often every summer when out-of-control wildfires rage from Alaska all the way to New Mexico and everything in between. S 2151, the Utah Wildfire Prevention Act, establishes a new resource for wildfire prevention efforts. In 2004, as part of the Southwest Forest Health and Wildfire Prevention Act, 3 Southwest Ecological Restoration Institutes, or SWERIs, were founded at universities in Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado, 3 of the 4 corner states. My bill proposes a 4th institution in Utah aiming to harness top-tier resources and collaborate with local, state, and federal wildfire prevention initiatives. Collaboration at all levels is critical for mitigating wildfire risk and responsible stewardship of our forests on state and federal land. These institutes attract the best in the field to research forest science, watershed health, and restoration, and then build partnerships to execute real projects on the ground. The impact of the Institute extends far beyond Utah. Their research, testing, and practices can be broadly applied to lessen the impact of catastrophic wildfires across the West. Wildfires have burned across the country since the beginning of time, since long before we even were a country. But it wasn't until the last century that low-severity fires became catastrophic burns with such wide-ranging impacts, affecting not only air quality, but water quality and vegetation, flora, fauna, you name it, it affects it. Most Western ecosystems depend on periodic fires to maintain their well-being naturally. And over the last century or so, these fires have been suppressed aggressively and often prematurely. The largely successful fire suppression techniques of recent history have left our forests denser and increasingly vulnerable to catastrophic burns. The Forest Service sets a maximum stand density index, or SDI, which represents the number of trees per unit area at 35%. However, a recent study indicates that this metric may be set far above the naturally occurring stand density index of 15 to 25% prior to aggressive fire suppression efforts in the West beginning a century ago. An artificially inflated stand density index forces the plants in the ecosystem to compete for resources that simply are not available. It leaves the entire ecosystem weak and susceptible to catastrophic fires. In Utah, there are other adverse consequences, including exacerbation of drought conditions and unhealthy air quality. As it turns out, in our state, very often an excessive stand density index leads to more evaporation of the snow. The snow pack provides most of our water for the year, and with more evaporation, it means less water going into our rivers, streams, ultimately our lakes and reservoirs. S 2132, the Catastrophic Wildfire Prevention Act, establishes a Forest Service pilot program in conjunction with state and local input to further research and establish the proper pre-fire suppression stand density index. My bill does not prescribe which metric must be preferred. Rather, it simply directs a determination and a subsequent adjustment of forest management plans to reflect the naturally occurring stand density index for a particular forest. Accurate forest management metrics will help reduce the chances of catastrophic wildfires, promoting ecological health, strengthening local watersheds at the same time. Lastly, I'd like to spotlight S 3036, the Mountain View Corridor Completion Act. This legislation would facilitate a straightforward land conveyance of some small BLM parcels within the Camp Williams National Guard Training Center. The Utah Department of Transportation will purchase the land at its fair market value, and the land will be used by the state to complete a critical highway that will alleviate congestion along the I-15 corridor. I'm glad to support this legislation and appreciate good faith efforts by the Utah Department of Transportation, the Utah National Guard, and the Bureau of Land Management to identify a map that all parties are pleased with. Thank you.
Senator Heinrich, do you have an opening statement?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank you for including the Pecos Watershed Protection Act on today's agenda. The Pecos Valley is home to a diverse community of farmers, ranchers, hunters, anglers, and business owners who are united by their reliance on the Pecos River and the expansive watersheds that feed that river. Members of the Jemez and Tusuque Pueblos have lived in the region and practiced their cultural traditions on the river since time immemorial. And unfortunately, this is also a region that has a history of poorly managed mining projects that have put local residents and their traditional way of life at risk. In 1991, a spill of toxic waste from an abandoned mine killed tens of thousands of fish, primarily trout, in the river for more than 11 miles. And it took decades and millions of dollars to clean up that mess. The last thing this area needs is new mines that would pose a threat to the Pecos River itself. This legislation would protect the Upper Pecos watershed from new mining claims that could threaten the health of the Pecos River and everyone who relies on it. This bill has overwhelming support from the local community, including Jemez Pueblo, Tusuque Pueblo, San Miguel County, Santa Fe County, and the village of Pecos itself. Madam Chair, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record letters and resolutions from these and other local supporters of the legislation.
Without objection.
Madam Chair, my father worked for Anaconda Copper. My grandfather was a gold miner in your state. There are many, many places in this country where new mining can be done safely and responsibly and with strong local support. This watershed just isn't one of them. And I hope that we can protect this incomparable landscape so that generations to come can rely on it just as the Pecos community does today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And then finally, Senator Wyden is unable to attend the hearing and asked if I would make a few remarks on his bill, which is S-2581. I am a co-sponsor. This is the Secure Rural Schools program. We know on this committee and in our communities, the Secure Rural Schools program has provided billions of dollars of support to rural counties and schools for essential services over more than 20 years. This legislation today reauthorizes this program for an additional 3 years. It has strong bipartisan support because of its critical importance to rural services such as education, road maintenance, search and rescue, and fire prevention. This 3-year reauthorization is necessary because the program lapsed at the end of fiscal year 23, and the additional time is needed to maintain these services in rural communities while a permanent fix is worked on to provide long-term certainty. Senator Hickenlooper, do you have an opening statement? You ready to? I do. All right, please go right ahead.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will be brief. I appreciate having our bill, the Mount Blue Sky Wilderness Act, included in today's hearing. This bill is going to help Colorado move past a very dark chapter of our history, one in which our former territorial governor, John Evans, endorsed and encouraged unthinkable atrocities against more than 200 Cheyenne and Arapaho people at what became known as the Sand Creek Massacre. I think even more insidious, about 6 months before that, he issued a proclamation declaring any Native American not on their reservation as an enemy of the state, and encouraged and, in essence, authorized the people of Colorado to kill any Native American they encountered as a hostile Native American. And not only their threat, but he specifically acknowledged that their property should become their bounty for having done this so-called service to the state. And he had a promise to pay for arms, ammunition, horses to commit this really unthinkable injustice. This all led to the Sand Creek Massacre. Almost 200 largely older men, women, and children who were killed. The massacre was truly horrific, and the mutilation of bodies has been well documented. The massacre has had long-lasting repercussions with the Cheyenne Arapaho who both tribes were ultimately forced out of Colorado and traveled great distances to find safety. Despite that legacy of cruelty, one of Colorado's most iconic and beloved peaks has held Evans's name for well over half a century, Evans being the governor who perpetrated this initiative. But that is not the case anymore. The U.S. Board on Geographic Names has changed the name of the mountain to one proposed and agreed to by the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, Mount Blue Sky. The name is a bit of poetry, but it's also much more. The Arapaho are also known as the Blue Sky people, and the Cheyenne have an annual ceremony of renewal of life that's called Blue Sky. The new name is already in effect for the mountain itself, but not for the surrounding wilderness area. That is something only Congress can change. For me, this is a full circle. I issued, while I was governor, a formal apology on behalf of the state of Colorado on the 150th anniversary of the massacre. I'm proud to lead this bill, which would change the name of the Mount Evans Wilderness to the Mount Blue Sky Wilderness. I look forward to working with my colleagues on the committee to make sure we get swift passage. Thank you. I yield back.
At this time, I'd like to introduce our witness panel. Providing the administration's testimony are Nada Wolf-Culver, the Principal Deputy Director at the Bureau of Land Management, Jacqueline Emanuel, the Associate Deputy Chief for the Forest Service, and then, as you've heard, also testifying is Mark, is it Boschel?
Boschel.
Mark Boschel, the Deputy Director of the Utah Land Policy Coordinating Office, who will be providing testimony on 3 of Senator Lee's bills. I would ask each of you, if you could, to limit your remarks to no more than 5 minutes. After everyone on the panel has given their statement, we'll turn to a round of questions from committee members. Ms. Culver, I'll have you begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairwoman Cortez Masto, Ranking Member Lee, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today on 16 bills related to the Bureau of Land Management. I'm Nada Wolf-Culver, the BLM's Principal Deputy Director. The BLM manages approximately 245 million surface acres, located primarily in 12 western states, as well as 700 million subsurface acres under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, or FLPMA. The BLM is committed to its core mission of multiple use and sustained yield, which provides for a careful balancing across many uses and resources to steward the public lands for all people. The BLM manages public lands for a broad range of uses, such as renewable and conventional energy development, livestock grazing, timber production, hunting and fishing, recreation, wilderness, and conservation more broadly, including restoration and protecting cultural and historic resources. Lands managed by the BLM also provide vital habitat for more than 3,000 species of wildlife and support valuable fisheries. Public lands are an important economic driver for communities across the West, from commercial activities on public lands to people drawn to visit or live near them, and generate significant revenues that support state and local governments. We appreciate the sponsors' work on the bills under consideration today, which apply to almost every facet of the BLM's broad multiple-use mandate. I'll briefly touch on the 16 bills on the agenda regarding the BLM, referencing them by number for efficiency in my 5 minutes. The Department appreciates the subcommittee's continued interest in addressing the risk of wildfire on our public lands. We support the intent of the spatial fire management plans in S1764 and would like to work with the committee on technical modifications to ensure effective implementation of the bill. We also support the goals of S2151 and the research institutes that further our collective abilities to achieve effective ecological restoration that increases the natural resilience of public lands to wildfire. Likewise, the department supports the goal of S1719 to address catastrophic wildfires, although we oppose the broad categorical exclusions. Given the extent of wildfire risk across the nation, we recommend that this bill be broadened to include all types of public lands. The BLM appreciates the sponsor's efforts to resolve the longstanding disputes regarding Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act eligibility for several Southeast Alaska Native communities through S1889, and to further the process to clear the title to lands conveyed to village corporations through S2615. The BLM opposes S175 as the bill would enact certain public land orders without allowing time to correct the legal defects in the previous decision-making process and ensure adequate engagement with affected parties. Federal lands are home to many of the nation's mature and old-growth forests that are critical to the health, prosperity, and resilience of our communities. To this end, the Department supports the Revegetation Action Plan required in S2991. We support the goal of S3062 to facilitate efficient fuels reduction and recommend that ONC lands be excluded from the bill's provision disallowing fees and payments. The Department looks forward to working with Congress on the extension of the Secure Rural Schools Act provided in S2581. The Act provides valuable funding for schools, roads, and other services and activities to over 700 counties with federal lands. The Department supports the withdrawal and protection of the Pecos River watershed in S3033 as it aligns with the administration's conservation and environmental justice goals. However, the BLM cannot support S1348 as it would remove over 130,000 acres of public lands in Wyoming with valuable natural and cultural resources from protection as wilderness study areas and more broadly prohibit the application of BLM regulations. The Biden-Harris administration is committed to guaranteeing affordable, reliable, high-speed internet to rural communities and has committed $65 billion in funding for these efforts. As such, the BLM supports the goal of S2885, which also aligns with an ongoing BLM rulemaking. The BLM has no objection to the proposed conveyance of lands in S3036, which will be used to facilitate the completion of the Mountain View Corridor Highway in Utah. In addition, the Department is actively working to identify ways to enhance the efficiency of the land appraisal process. The Department supports S3079 and would appreciate the opportunity to work with the sponsor on technical amendments. Finally, the National Park Service has submitted a statement for the record in support of S3045 concerning the transfer of administrative jurisdiction over certain federal land in California. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Ms. Manuel.
Chair Cortez Masto, Ranking Member Lee, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I am Jacqueline Emanuel, Associate Deputy Chief of the National Forest System for the USDA Forest Service. My work in the National Forest System includes policy, oversight, and direction for programs across the 193 million acres of national forests and grasslands in 44 states and territories that make up the National Forest System. Over the last 2 decades, we have witnessed bigger and more destructive wildfires that are extremely challenging and costly to suppress. This growing wildfire crisis created the need for a new land management strategy. We are in our 2nd year of carrying out our 10-year strategy for confronting the wildfire crisis in the West. Our wildfire crisis strategy aims to increase science-based fuels treatments by up to 4 times previous treatment levels, especially in those areas most at risk. The bills that I'm here to testify today vary in specifics, but most are trying to help the Forest Service achieve the goals of reducing fire risk to communities and accomplishing critical work. The Forest Service is very grateful to Congress for providing resources through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. It has seeded our initial work and had put the wildfire crisis strategy in motion, and we look forward to continuing to work with Congress on these critical issues. S1764 calls for increased fire planning on federal lands, provides funding to prepare for wildfires, and establishes a grant program for firefighting equipment. The bill also authorizes specific funding for aircraft used in wildfire management operations and funding for post-fire rehabilitation. USDA supports the intent of the bill and looks forward to working with the committee and bill sponsors. While we appreciate all the efforts of Congress that is making to advance the wildfire crisis strategy, we're concerned that S1719 could replace our science-based approach to fire management, and we have concerns about the bill's additional procedural and process requirements. S2132 requires the Forest Service to establish a pilot program to identify, research, and establish pre-fire suppression stand density index for certain areas of the National Forest System, and to use this information as a benchmark for forest treatments. While we support several of the goals of the bill, we'd like to work with Congress to address agency concerns. S2867 proposes several changes and updates to Forest Service policies and regulations with the intent of providing more effective forest management. While we support several of the goals of the bill, we would like to work with Congress to address concerns with the bill's language. S 2991 focuses on the need to increase revegetation of national forests post-event, in addition to including provisions to increase carbon storage in forests, encourage the use of mass timber in buildings, and expand research and data collection in these areas. USDA supports these goals and would like to work with the committee and the bill sponsors on technical assistance. S 297 requires the USDA to develop a pilot program to establish and operate nurseries on National Forest System land. USDA supports the goals of this bill and looks forward to working with Congress to address the nation's replanting backlog. The USDA would also like to work with Congress on S 3062, which designates free use areas on the National Forest System land that contain small diameter tree in fire hazard areas. USDA looks forward to working with Congress on S 2581 and would be happy to provide technical assistance to ensure effective implementation. USDA would also like to work with the committee on S 2855. While some of this bill aligns with current Forest Service efforts to increase efficiencies, USDA has concerns with provisions in the bill that duplicate or potentially conflict with existing authorities. While I'm focusing my statement today on the bills with a nationwide scope, I want to address S 1889. USDA recognizes that it is the policy of the United States to restore tribal homelands to tribal ownership and to promote tribal self-government. The administration recognizes the importance of the legislation and would like to continue working through the legislation's impact on the Tongass National Forest program of work. There are several other bills on today's agenda where my written statement expresses the administration's official position. We are prepared to provide technical assistance addressing any outstanding issues and concerns. This concludes my statement, and I would be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Boschel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Boschel. I am the Deputy Director of Utah's Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office, a division within the Utah Department of Natural Resources. Our office is tasked by the Utah Legislature to coordinate and promote the state's interest in public lands. Prior to my work with the Department of Natural Resources, I was a Bureau of Land Management wildland firefighter. I'm also the son of a retired Forest Service employee who spent an entire career working on our national forests in wildland firefighting. Forest management and wildfire are topics very important to me, both professionally and personally. As such, it is an honor to address this committee. Recent drought and uncharacteristically large wildfires have not only raised concerns of public safety and loss of property, but also for the need of water conservation and improved air quality. Over 100 years of fire suppression and fire-dependent ecosystems, coupled with a lack of active management, have created high fuel loads and overstocked, unhealthy forests. Watersheds continue to be impacted by natural and human-caused stressors statewide, leading to unhealthy conditions. Utah, like other states throughout the West, is wholly dependent on the healthy watersheds found in national forests to meet our basic water needs. Wildfire-affected watersheds is a topic that is becoming increasingly important for the state and its cities and towns. My small hometown of Panguitch in southern Utah sits in a mountain valley surrounded by the Dixie National Forest. For years, the city feared that its water system and supporting watershed were at risk of wildfire. Despite years of formal requests for proactive management and thinning, one of the state's largest wildfires burned significant portions of the municipal watershed. Subsequent flooding led to a broken and contaminated municipal water system, temporarily cutting off access to the city's drinking water. To fix the damaged system, the city had to clean its water tanks, replace spring boxes, and drill a new well at the cost of $2 million, a significant cost for a small community. This small-scale yet highly impactful incident highlights both the unhealthy state of our forests and the increased risk it poses to a more densely populated cities throughout the state and the West. The state of Utah is being as proactive as possible to better manage its forests by partnering with the United States Forest Service through its Shared Stewardship Program. The Shared Stewardship Program commits to protecting communities and watersheds by addressing the threat of catastrophic wildfire on our National Forest System lands in Utah. A priority area identified by the state and Forest Service officials through the Shared Stewardship Program were the canyons east of Salt Lake City, managed by the Uinta-Wasatch Cache National Forest Salt Lake Ranger District. Maintaining the resilience of our drinking water is imperative when faced with the challenges of drought and rapid population growth in the Salt Lake Valley. Suppressing fires has resulted in heavy accumulation of dead surface fuels and unnaturally dense stands of mature trees. Additionally, over the last few decades, trees have died from various diseases and insects such as spruce and mountain pine beetles. These dead and dying trees increase the potential for severe fires and may impact drinking water and other values we care about, like recreation opportunities, wildlife habitat, infrastructure, and human life. Senate Bill 2132, titled the Catastrophic Wildfire Prevention Act of 2023, if passed, would be a step towards improved management of our forests. The proposed pilot program is intended to facilitate collaboration between the Forest Service and state forest management agencies to identify areas to study and research pre-fire suppression stand density, which would help drive important management objectives and benchmarks for better management of our forests. Stand density index is an important parameter for wildland fire management, particularly when working to reduce wildfire risk and establish appropriate thinning density levels to promote healthier forest while reducing risks of fires and associated negative impacts. Senate Bill 2151 would add Utah to the Southwest Ecological Restoration Institute, which is currently made up of 3 western states, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. Utah's Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands currently collaborates with the Institute through several state programs. Specifically, our Forest Products and Business Program has been working with the Institute on several efforts to strengthen our mutual capacity for infrastructure and workforce development in the forest products sector, aimed at better finding markets for wood products in order to reduce the cost to thin our forests. Our Forestry, Fire, and State Lands Division has also engaged with the same state forestry agencies and universities to conduct research and develop initiatives for post-disturbance reforestation. Utah could greatly benefit by more direct involvement with the Institute, with one of our very own state universities acting as Utah's lead participant. These bills are important, and I applaud this committee for considering this critical legislation and encourage their passage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boschel. Now we'll start with the subcommittee members' questions for the panel, and I'll begin. Ms. Culver and Ms. Emanuel, let me start with my Bill 1764, which is the Western Wildfire Support Act. Thank you for your comments regarding the bill and the need for technical support there. Happy to work with Ms. Culver, with you and the department. But can you both talk about the importance of a comprehensive approach to wildfire management? Quite often, everybody talks about the suppression because that's the most reactive we have to be when a fire occurs. But quite often, there is little support for the pre-fire planning and post-fire recovery efforts that are just as important as the suppression. So I would like both of you, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about that and how the creation of these fire management plans in general can help communities. And maybe, Ms. Culver, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman. The idea of a spatial forest management plan is something we support because, as you noted, once we're fighting the fire, that's what we have to focus on, and these plans would give us a chance to build on what we continue to learn, the cooperation we continue to have with local communities, with our partners and other agencies to try to control fire ahead of time, to control the need for fire, the risk of fire, and to ensure we have a plan as it happens and after. And we appreciate the funding in this bill.
And thank you. And, you know, quite often listen, we all have wildfires, unfortunately, in the West. We see that. And part of that is that pre-fire planning, not just for our fire officials, but our communities to have a better understanding of how they can mitigate around where they live or their businesses or in their communities, the wildfires as well. And I know in Tahoe, we have a great working relationship with the Forest Service. Ms. Emanuel, can you talk a little bit about the front end and the back end as well, the importance of managing those?
Yes, thank you for that question. And we, too, support a holistic approach. We've learned that when we just focus singularly on suppression, it just doesn't work. And so putting equal focus to prevention and reforestation is really important. And cross-boundary and interagency work and work with states and local governments can really help safeguard communities. Providing technical assistance and grants and resources and knowledge so that communities can be better prepared for and understand that a resilient community is a planned community. And to the extent we can do more of that, we'll definitely be able to better protect communities on the front end.
And so can I ask the both of you, how can communities that are surrounded or within federal land areas collaborate with federal agencies to ensure this preparation? Let me just give you an example. I just recently heard from Nevada Community Foundations and Tahoe representatives, Lake Tahoe representatives, who say they are unable to utilize the bipartisan infrastructure community wildfire defense grant program that helps at-risk communities plan for and reduce wildfire risk, because these grants cannot be applied to federal forest lands that are interspersed throughout the Lake Tahoe area. And I'm just curious why that's the case, or is there a way that we need to change federal legislation to help these communities? And I'm Ms. Manuel, I might ask
Sure.
you to address that, if you can. If
Yeah, I don't know what the specific situation is there, but I do know that expanding the definition of wildland-urban interface could be helpful in reaching a broader extended community. There might be some things we can work on. I'd be happy to work with committee staff and your staff to.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And then finally, let me talk a little bit about S 3079, and Ms. Culver, as you touched on, the bill is really, we're looking at reducing the bottleneck of appraisals required for federal land transactions. Can you talk about how this bill can enhance the efficiency of that appraisal process and reduce that backlog, or give us a sense of what's happening there?
Certainly, as the Bureau that does land conveyances and exchanges, we follow the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, which ensures that we get fair market value. Part of that is ensuring adequate appraisals. Right now, somebody we might contract with in one state would still need to get approved in another, and this bill would really increase our efficiency and ability to have somebody just go through that process once, so that we could continue to contract and really expand the pool of qualified appraisers we have.
And there's a staffing shortage, is that accurate? And that's why there's this backlog and why we need to think outside the box?
Yes, we are doing everything we can to become more efficient with the resources we have, but additional resources would be incredibly beneficial here.
Thank you. Thank you. Ranking Member Lee.
Thank you. Mr. Boschel, thanks again for traveling to be with us today. As the Deputy Director of PLIPCO, you help oversee the collaboration with local partners on land and forest management projects. S2151, the Utah Wildfire Research Institute Act, would establish an ecological restoration institute in Utah. Our state would become one of the states, in fact, the fourth states in the four corners states, to host such an institute, hosted at one of our fine universities, unlocking potential for additional collaboration, additional research, and on-the-ground efforts to help enhance forest management and wildfire prevention efforts across the state, which would be very helpful because our state has been ravaged, as you know, by wildfires in recent years. Mr. Boschel, how will a dedicated Utah-based institute benefit from the state's forest management and wildfire prevention efforts? Or how will it benefit them, not from them?
Senator, complicated problems require creative solutions, and I think Utah would significantly benefit from more involvement in the Institute. I think those creative solutions will come out of the Institute. Collaboration, research, and development of initiatives are cornerstones of moving the needle on the forest problem in Utah, and our involvement in that process could be huge. Local specific problems require local solutions. And if we could involve ourselves in that institute, I think we'd have a much higher success rate at getting a handle on the problem.
Indeed. Now, there's a long history of successful, innovative resource management and planning programs in Utah that add value, especially to wildfire prevention and restoration efforts across the West. How will Utah's participation in the Institute benefit the broader Western region?
Utah leads strong on this issue. Utah is involved in a lot of different programs. Utah has the Watershed Restoration Initiative, which is a program where we've partnered with the United States Forest Service to conduct watershed treatments on our most important watersheds to improve water quality, water quantity, and to promote biological diversity. We also are involved in the Shared Stewardship Program that I mentioned earlier, which is an opportunity to partner up to target our most vulnerable watersheds that will have the greatest impact on local communities in the state. And we have a grazing improvement program that restores degraded rangelands. And so Utah is bringing a lot of time, a lot of money and knowledge to the Institute. We would hit the ground running, and we would we'd provide the Institute with a lot of institutional knowledge, not just from these programs, but through our universities that have spent a lot of time and money on these issues.
Now, turning to S2132, it's a bill that would establish the Forest Service pilot program to work with state and local forest management agencies and research and better assess the proper pre-aggressive fire suppression stand density index for certain forests. As I mentioned earlier, we've been aggressively suppressing the naturally occurring fire for the last century or so, and as a result, we've got forests where there's a lot of fuel that's built up, and the stand density index is higher than what Mother Nature herself can tolerate. In your testimony, you mentioned the negative impacts of fire suppression, of overly aggressive fire suppression over the last 100 years. How has this approach contributed to the current state of affairs in Utah's forests?
We've got a buildup of fuels out in our forests. There were research studies conducted by our universities in Utah. They call them repeat photography studies, where they'd go find old photos from the 1800s and the early 1900s and showing the landscape and the trees and the forests. And then they recreated those photos, went back to the exact same spot and retook the photo 50 to 100 years later. And you can see this dramatic change, this increase in vegetation from 100 years ago. So we know that there's been a change, and we know it's significant. But when we talk about healthy forests and natural forests, it's hard to define exactly what that means.
Right.
We know it's not currently, but we want to know what healthy is, what natural is, and this stand density index studies would help with that. It would give us something to look for and something to manage for.
Right. It looks prettier when it's denser in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
But it can also create problems for air quality, for the watershed, for the health of the forest, and that's an issue. See, my time's expired, Madam Chair. I do want to offer up to the record a letter from Carlos Braceras, the director of the Utah Department of Transportation, and Lisa Wilson, the deputy director, regarding S3036, the Mountain View Corridor Completion Act.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you to our chairman, ranking member. Thank you for being here this afternoon to provide testimony in these bills. I've got a couple of them on the agenda, S2615, the Alaska Native Village Municipal Lands Restoration Act. This is one that I would hope that my colleagues agree that it's a long time we address this issue, free up these lands. Got another one, S175, which would codify 5 public land orders that were signed by the Secretary of the Interior back in 2021. Both BLM and the state are looking for resolutions of these long-term withdrawals that BLM views as unnecessary. So we look forward to working with the agencies to resolve these, and with our colleagues here at the committee. I have a full statement on all 3 of the bills that are before the committee that I will submit for the record. But I want to direct my statements, if I may, to Ms. Emanuel. I appreciate that you're here today, but I have to tell you that I am a bit confused about the testimony for S1889. This is the Unrecognized Southeast Alaska Native Communities Recognition and Compensation Act. We call it, for shorthand, the Landless Bill, because it basically describes the situation, 5 communities in Southeast Alaska that were left out of ANCSA when it came to their land entitlements. But my frustration here is your testimony is so different from what we heard from the deputy chief. Chris French sat in that position just over a year ago. He assured me that the administration supported our legislation, and then they went further. He said if there's anything that they wished to see changed, he committed to having staff sit down with my staff. And that was June of last year. So we're a year and 4 months later. My office has taken multiple trips to Tenakee. I have gone to Tenakee. We've heard from the BLM. We've heard from some of the most remote villages in Alaska. We have representatives from Tenakee Springs, Councilman Mapes, who's actually here at the committee today. The only entity we didn't hear from was Forest Service. And yet your testimony alludes that there's some concerns over some of these panel selections. So I would ask for some specifics. You don't need to do it right here, but please get back to me about specifically which parcels your testimony is referring to. Tell me why these concerns were not listed as part of the administration's testimony back in not only the 117th, but the 116th Congress. And then I'd just like an explanation provided to me as to why the Forest Service, Secretary Vilsack is pretty aware of this as well, how come we didn't hear any concerns, your thoughts about this, despite a commitment made in person in front of this committee to do so? And as you're thinking about how you're going to respond to that, it's really difficult not to point out the hypocrisy that we see when the Forest Service says they have concerns about providing Alaska Natives 115,000 acres, and they're worried about that due to the impact that it would have on the ability of the Forest Service to meet its timber harvest goals in the 16.7 million acres of the Tongass. To me, this is almost laughable. It's contained in your written testimony, but we heard last year, we've heard it in multiple hearings. It's been almost 2 years now that Secretary Vilsack called me. He told me himself that the department is not going to be abiding by the Tongass transition strategy that he authored back in 2016 during the Obama administration. Now, our forestry people are probably going to be happy to hear that the Forest Service is looking out for their interests, but seriously, it's been a couple years now that the Biden administration said we're going to prohibit old growth projects. We've got news articles that underscore that. Biden administration ends large-scale logging of old-growth timber in Alaska's Tongass. Goes on to say, under plans announced Thursday, large-scale old-growth projects that were being planned for the forest will not go forward. We've got email traffic from the Forest Service to my staff laying out Forest Service intentions to revise the Tongass Forest Land and Resource Management Plan. So it's almost laughable, but it's so frustrating that there's no laughing here. To suggest that this administration is somehow trying to meet its timber harvest obligations in the Tongass Forest while it provides these nice statements, kind words about their support for Alaska Natives. It's glaring to me, again, the hypocrisy here. So I've used my time. You know where I'm coming from. I don't get it. If you had concerns, my telephone number hasn't changed since I got here. So I'd like an answer to my questions. We want to get this resolved. It has been outstanding for far too long. We're trying to thread the needle with some communities that want to figure out a positive path forward. They have to live in these areas. But when we have the agency just kind of go inside and not speak up until they can come here to this subcommittee and provide obtuse testimony about some concerns without putting it forward, it's just not right. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Senator, thank you. And I know we are all time constrained today because of the vote that is pending right now, but I would hope that the Forest Service responds to the senator's demands and requests. They're not unreasonable. So thank you. Senator Risch.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this hearing today. Our public lands and rural communities in Idaho and really across the West rely on the decisions that are made in this very room, and I'm honored to have two bills included in this hearing that are especially important to my state. The first is the Secure Rural Schools Reauthorization Act, Senate Bill 2581, which I introduced with my colleagues, Senator Wyden and Senator Crapo. Nearly 2 out of every 3 acres in Idaho is owned by the federal government. My colleagues east of the Mississippi River have difficult getting their arms around that when I tell them it, but it's the case, and it's true in all Western states. Senator Lee's, of course, and even much more so in your state, Senator Cortez Masto. In any event, because of this, the counties are put in a serious disadvantage when it comes to funding schools and essential infrastructure. As in the western states, as with most of America, they rely on property taxes to do this. And of course, when the government owns that much, it's hard to get the rest of the properties to pay for that. So where we have timberlands and grazing lands at one time were much more productive than they are today. When I say productive, I don't mean they're not producing as much fiber. They are, but it's just not harvested. And so it's important that we do something to help these rural communities. We made a commitment to these communities, and it's our responsibility to continue to fulfill it. SRS recently expired. It's been incredibly successful. It's absolutely necessary, and it's imperative that we reauthorize it. The second is the Fire Sheds Act of 1719, which I introduced with Ranking Member Barrasso, Senators Daines and Crapo. This bill will allow states to work with federal agencies across jurisdictional boundaries to conduct desperately needed land management projects. The catastrophic wildfires in the West are exacerbated by decades-long buildup of dry, burnable fuels. Everyone knows it. Fire sheds will better protect Western communities, wildlife, and fire sheds by removing needless red tape and encouraging collaborative and proactive land management. Our forests and rural communities in the West are in serious need of assistance. On a more parochial note, Senator Cortez Masto, I'll give you an idea that some of the states have actually taken the bull by the horns when it comes to these fire interface with communities. When I was governor, George W. Bush was president. He invited the states to create a roadless rule in their state. The roadless fight had been going on forever, and nobody knows how many lawsuits. And so we took it on in Idaho. I was the only governor that did take it on, and we wrote a roadless rule. I started at the counties and took it on up. And one of the pieces of that roadless rule, we took it area by area, and there were a large number of areas that we had in the state, but we took it area by area, took it with the county commissioners, and wrote the rule specifically for each of those areas. Where we had communities, small communities out in places that were in roadless areas that are very far from anything, we actually prescribed in the rule that it would have a special designation so they could do thinning and do the kind of management immediately adjacent to these rural communities, particularly when from the side that the fire most likely comes from. And we did a lot of those. It's actually been successful in a couple of instances to keep communities from burning completely to the ground as they do. We brought the rule back to Washington, D.C. To sell to the Forest Service because they had to adopt it even though it was the rule we wrote. Fortuitously, Dale Bosworth was chief of the Forest Service at that time. Fortuitously because he was in Idaho, but more importantly, he and I graduated from the University of Idaho at the same year, both with degrees in forest management, so we understood each other, and you won't be surprised to hear that we got the rule passed. The next step, was, of course, was the environmentalists took off after us. They sued us in front of the most environmental-friendly judge in America in Boise, Idaho. We won. And it then went to the Ninth Circuit, and we won again. Now, you may say, how could that possibly have happened? Well, when I put together the group to put this rule together, we brought both industry and the environmental community together. And the environmental community stood with us all the way through. We all agreed that if we did this, we were going to stick together. They stuck with me in the lawsuits. I commend President Obama because when he became president, I was done being governor. I was back here. The lawsuit was going to the Ninth Circuit, and we now changed administration, so they could have easily abandoned me. They sent me their solicitor, came in and sat down and said, well, what do you want to do here? And I said, look, we were going to the Ninth Circuit, and he said, well, you know, the environmental, there were just a few environmental groups that sued us. And he says, well, they want to settle. And I said, look, we did a collaborative process. I put together a model collaborative process. You can't do that and then have somebody who would, and these people were invited to join and didn't. You can't do that, have them sit in the sidelines, and then come in and sue when it's over. And they said, well, okay. But I said, I want this so bad that if they want to make a couple of changes for fundraising purposes or to save face, I said, let them have at it. We want to keep the rule. came back to me and he said, no, they want substantive changes to the rule. And I said, well, I don't want to settle this. Obama's people, to their credit, said, we'll stick with you. And I sat right beside him in the Ninth Circuit, and we made the thing stand. So it stands today. Our rural communities have special protections that were in that rule. This can be done at the state level. So there's an idea for you for Nevada. Thank you.
Senator, thank you. Always appreciate all the hard work you've always done. Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator Risch, I remember similar complications when we did our roadless rule following your model. It's not a smoothly paved path.
It's getting better.
Yeah, well,
But the more times it's used, it's getting better.
right. Well, the trail gets tamped down.
That's right.
Ms. Emanuel, the proposed Mount Blue Sky Wilderness would fall within Forest Service lands. And first, I have to ask, does the Forest Service support our bill? And can you speak to the support from the tribes and stakeholders and the local community as well, just in this specifically, but also generally?
Yes, thank you. And yes, we do support S 3044. And it's my understanding that there's broad support locally through county commissioners, tribal interests, local interests that all supported the name change. And we absolutely do and understand that it takes an act of Congress to do so.
All right, great, thank you. And Madam Chair, I'm also going to submit to the record that I did bring up with me a copy of the proclamation of Governor Evans, where he did say any Indian encountered would be judged to be hostile, and that it gives the authority to kill and destroy as enemies of the country wherever they may be found such hostile Indians. Further, the only reward I'm authorized to offer for such services, I hereby empower such citizens or parties of citizens to take captive and hold to their private use and benefit all the property of said hostile Indians they may capture, and to receive for all stolen property recovered from said Indians such reward as may be deemed proper and just. It's really hard to imagine, but we'll put it into the record.
Without objection.
Ms. Culver, Secretary Holland and the Department of Interior have, I think, demonstrated a firm commitment to giving tribes a seat at the table, working to address past injustices. Under Secretary Holland's historic leadership, Interior has taken decisive action to remove and replace derogatory or harmful names from some of our nation's most beloved places. Can you tell us a little more about the Secretary's direction on removing offensive names and why you all at Interior believe it's so important to take this tack?
Thank you, Senator Hickenlooper. As you noted, both President Biden and Secretary Holland have been incredible leaders on all aspects of tribal engagement, and this is one that the Department of the Interior has been very focused on in setting out a process to identify and address names of places that should be updated. At the Bureau of Land Management, we do engage with tribes in, for example, our land use planning process to look at these opportunities. Overall, however, the effort is led at the Department of the Interior by the U.S. Geological Survey. They interact with the Board on Geographic Names, so I'd be happy to also get you more information on the record from our sister agency.
Great. I appreciate it, and you know, those were difficult times, and certainly having read a lot of the accounts, many people were fearful for their lives and the families of the lives of their families. But the leaders are and should be always held to a higher standard, I think, and the conduct, at least in this case, was really something that should not be celebrated, and I think it really isn't anymore. Thank you. I'll yield back to the chair.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. I want to start by saying a word in favor of two pieces of legislation before us. S2581, which Senator Risch was talking about just a second ago. This is the Secure Rural Schools Reauthorization Act, hugely significant for my state. The Mark Twain National Forest in Missouri has 1.5 million acres that runs across 29 counties in the state of Missouri. I know that my western colleagues have a lot of federal land in their state. You know, even in southern Missouri, though, our counties there, 50% of the land in many of the counties in southern Missouri is federal land. And in 2022, rural areas in Missouri received $2.8 million from the Secure Rural Schools funding. So we certainly want to see that be reauthorized, and I'm very supportive of that measure today. I assume, Ms. Emanuel, that you are as well. You support the Secure Rural Schools Reauthorization Act.
Extending the authorization of secure rural schools will undoubtedly bring much-needed resources to those counties.
Just give me a sense of what else the department is doing to support counties that have significant amounts of federal land.
Well, our Reimagine Recreation work is taking a look at gateway communities and the recreation economy and how much that actually contributes to local communities. I think that's probably one of our most promising efforts.
Very good. I also want to say a word in favor of Senator Barrasso's Close the Gap Act. This is on rural broadband. This is vital legislation from my point of view intended to speed permitting for broadband infrastructure that is, again, built within federal lands. Extremely important to my state. We are a majority rural state in the state of Missouri, and so often folks in rural areas are left behind here. And, you know, it's become a commonplace. Students have to go to the local McDonald's or Wendy's in order to be able to get internet access, do their homework. That should not be the case, particularly there shouldn't be this disparity between folks who live in urban areas and folks who live in rural areas. So I'm very supportive of what Senator Barrasso's legislation is doing, and I would assume, Ms. Emanuel, that you would support these efforts and that the department is going to do everything it can to speed up approval of rural broadband. Is that a fair thing to say?
We've made a lot of strides to streamline and gain efficiencies in that issue, and I think anything we can do that helps us be more efficient and effective is going to be supported.
Good, very good. Finally, for me, Ms. Culver, if I could just ask you, according to the numbers that I have, Department of the Interior issued only 120 new oil and gas leases in fiscal year 2022. That's compared to over 1,800 leases in fiscal year 2019. Just to put that in terms of acreage, in 2022, the amount of new acres leased was 75,000. That compares to 2.25 million new acres leased in fiscal year 2019. So huge disparities. But am I right in thinking that you oppose any new oil and gas leases on federal land?
Thanks for the opportunity to respond to that question. We are currently conducting regular lease sales and complying with the Inflation Reduction Act on that topic.
But you personally have criticized even these, from my point of view, pretty paltry new oil and gas leases. Is that right?
The BLM is continuing to conduct quarterly lease sales and issue new oil and gas leases.
Well, I'm just looking at an email that was obtained from a FOIA request of yours that's been published in the press, I think yesterday, in which a congressman from Arizona says there ought to be no new oil and gas leases. And you respond to that and say that's an excellent response.
I'm so glad you raised that. The part of the email that I was discussing was the Chairman Grijalva's note that conducting oil and gas leasing under the current system has significant flaws, both for environmental reasons and fiscal returns. And that's something that we've been working on at the Department of the Interior, at the Bureau of Land Management, and consistent, again, with many of the helpful provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act with the leadership of Chairman Manchin.
Well, I was just confused because his statement, the congressman's statement, came as a criticism of the Secretary of the Interior announcing some additional oil and gas leases. And he criticized that, and you said that you agreed with him. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on inside the department.
No problem. As I said, what I was talking about was his pointing out the challenges with leasing under the current system that required updates. There's a reason that the federal oil and gas program has been identified as high risk for over a decade by the Government Accountability Office, and those were the comments that were the focus of my email.
He said holding more lease sales under today's standards is economically wasteful and environmentally destructive, in response to the Secretary saying that you're going to go forward with some additional fossil fuel leasing. So you agree with that, his statement, you're
I
saying?
agree with the point that we needed to update, and that's what we've been doing. We've been doing it through policy, we've been doing it in our lease sales, and we're doing it in our proposed regulation, and Congress has done that in many aspects of the Inflation Reduction.
And so this is it, Madam Chair. I see I'm over time. So you disagree with the position of your secretary in moving forward with these very limited leasing? You think that was a bad idea? You agree with the Congressman that she was wrong to do it?
I don't disagree with the actions of the Secretary of the Interior. I worked for the Secretary of the Interior, and we are conducting oil and gas leasing.
Yeah, that's what I found so confusing about your email. I'll ask you some additional questions for the record. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Daines.
Winter's coming to Montana. We're starting to see some snow, starting to see some cooler temperatures. Prescribed burning has begun in our national forests, and I think it's important to continue discussing reforms to our forest management policy so we're prepared for the next fire season. Our forests will not be able to get needed on-the-ground work done if Congress fails to cut red tape and streamline compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act as well as the Endangered Species Act. Additionally, we've got to take action addressing the problem of frivolous litigation. In Montana alone, there are over 300 million board feet of timber projects tied up by litigation. In the Kootenai National Forest, nearly all the on-ground work has been halted, with over 165 million board feet tied up in 3 enjoined projects. 2 of these projects were halted just 41 days apart this past summer. These projects would have used timber harvest and prescribed fire to replicate historic burn patterns and would have protected homes and communities in the wildland-urban interface. Halting these projects harms communities. It's devastating for local forest contracting businesses and sawmills who depend on this federal timber to stay in business. Losing sawmills because of insufficient timber supply makes no sense while our forests are overstocked and a tinderbox is waiting to burn if not actively managed. And I remind all of my colleagues, a forest fire is a massive carbon emission event. A healthy forest is a carbon sink. And more sawmill losses will only increase the cost of forest treatments and slow work as we lose our forestry workforce, unlike we've seen happen in Colorado. My bill to fix the Ninth Circuit decision, the Cottonwood decision, that passed this committee in May will be crucial in preventing some of the litigation that is stopping wildfire mitigation work, and I'll continue to urge its passage in the full Senate, and I do commend my colleagues for working with me on both sides to get that through this committee. Additionally, I would urge the Forest Service to use emergency authorities like the fuel break categorical exclusion and the emergency action determination to build defensible space around towns that are in the wildland-urban interface to protect them from wildfire. Associate Deputy Chief Emanuel, we've heard testimony on several forestry bills that will increase active forest management and encourage more collaborative approaches to forestry, which will improve forest health. It helps protect our watersheds, it helps provide better wildlife habitat, reduces risk of wildfire, and of course helps our workers and badly needed revenues in counties that are predominantly federal lands. However, in Montana, these forest projects are being halted by litigation. Without reversal of the Ninth Circuit Cottonwood decision, isn't there a risk that we'll only continue to see more projects enjoined by the courts?
Thank you for that. And first, I just want to thank you for your leadership on this issue, Senator. It's extremely concerning and important that we get a long-term fix for Cottonwood because we can't speculate on those impacts, but we already see them in your state. And so a long-term solution is something we welcome working with you on.
Well, thank you. And again, I just want to commend my colleagues on both sides of this dais that have, it's been taking a number of years for everybody to fully, I think, understand this, but once the understanding was there, we've had some really strong bipartisan support now, and we've got to make the final push now to get that through the floor of the Senate and onto the President's desk. Associate Deputy Chief Emanuel, the Forest Service released an inventory of mature and old-growth forests in April of this year, and then issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking relating to these forests. Now, I've been hearing some concerns from Montanans that rulemaking on this topic will simply be used as another way to stop and impede active management that's so needed in our overstocked forests to prevent catastrophic wildfires. As we say often in Montana, either we're going to manage our forests or our forests are going to manage us through catastrophic wildfires. How can the Forest Service ensure that active forest management is not further harmed?
Well, I can tell you at this point, we're just inventorying, defining, and analyzing mature and old growth. No policy decisions have been made up to now. So using all the tools that we have are the ways that we're going to ensure that we can continue to manage for the wildfire crisis strategy outcomes. And there's just the inventory that has happened. And like I said, no policy has been affected.
Okay, well, thank you, and thanks for keeping an eye on that. The last thing we need are more barriers to being better managers of our forests and actively manage them as well. Thank you, Assistant Chief.
Thank you, Senator Janes. Seeing no further questions and knowing there's some of us have to get to second vote on the floor that's pending, we're going to close out the subcommittee hearing. I'd like to thank our witnesses for their testimony this afternoon. Mr. Boschel, not many of my colleagues, other than the gentleman sitting to my left, know what Panguitch or where it is. I do. It's a beautiful place. Been there fishing, grew up spending a lot of my time in southern Utah. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you for joining us. Some members of the committee may submit additional questions in writing, and so we will ask you to submit answers for the record. Committee members will have until 6 p.m. tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record. We will keep the hearing open for 2 weeks to receive any additional comments. And this subcommittee meeting is adjourned.